We need more of that. We need more people to just simply stand up and say no. Cancel culture does indeed have a lot to answer for, as far as I'm concerned, and it's caused a lot of hype and hiccups. And those of you who've been following over the last couple of weeks in the news pertaining to this already know the story of Dorian Abbot, so I'm not necessarily going to go into that too much. But I was thinking more about this, and with the backlash that happened because of it, and the nice things here, and I then saw this piece in Quillette, which actually pretty kind of nicely captured some of my own thoughts on it. And, I wonder now if finally there's people who are realizing, because Dorian in himself would admit it to you that, he was very neutral. He didn't care much for politics and what have you. He was sort of thrust into the spotlight very unwillingly, with the cancel culture madness in universities and academia. And seeing as I'm scheduling this to go out tomorrow, on Thursday, October 21st, I will say I am looking forward to Mr. Abbott's lecture later in the day, with Princeton. But he would admit himself that he doesn't get very political. He doesn't want to be very political. He's in a section where he doesn't have to be, or he shouldn't have to be involved in the politics. And admittedly, so am I. The politics should have absolutely nothing to do with what I'm doing, with what I do work-wise on a regular basis outside of yammering on the internet. And he admitted that himself. He didn't want to be thrust into the spotlight, but he realized he didn't have any choice but to say something to stick up for himself. And it's the most unwilling. He's an unwilling hero in a way. He didn't ask for what was handed to him. He didn't ask for the mayhem that happened. I don't know if he expected it or not when the mayhem started last year with his initial thing at Chicago, and of course now with MIT. But I think there's some good things to be had for it, and I think it's written out nicely in this Quillette piece. So I've skimmed it. I don't know that I'm going to agree with all of it, but I think it's written out nicely. But before we get into that, don't forget, we got a Locals over here that you can come in and join us and have some fun. Locals is free for members, and you can kind of just lurk and hang out and see what you like. And you can do that if you'd like. You can be a free member. But as free members, you can't comment, you can't post, you can't share anything that you want to share. And there's some things that I'm only going to put behind the paywall. Like there's something I'm thinking about recording tomorrow that's just going to go behind the paywall on Locals, so you won't see it here on YouTube. So if you want to get access to that, you have to become a supporter of Locals, either monthly, $3 a month, or annual. And hey, look, you get 2 months free if you sign up for annual. So there you go with that, and I hope you come over to join us. It's a fun time over there. It's a fun time over there, and I'm building up the community, so I'm looking for more things to do with community members, and hopefully we'll get into some interesting things there soon. Anyway, back to Quillette. Cancel culture has a lot to answer for. Sometimes our most prestigious cultural institutions fail to live up to their high educational and moral commitments and responsibilities. These failures especially damage the social fabric because they tend to harm many people who rely on them and tarnish the high ideals that the institutions claim to exemplify. An incident in early October involving MIT, a jewel in the world academia's crown. I don't know about that particularly now, but it has historically been considered one of the best physical science universities in the world, presents an especially egregious instance of this institutional failing, aggravated by that university's cowardice in the face of intimidation and threats by self-righteous students and their faculty allies. Ooh. I like that phrasing because it usually is what it amounts to. MIT had invited Dorian Abbot, a University of Chicago geophysicist, to deliver the prestigious John Carlson Lecture on Climate and the Potential for Life on Other Planets, a topic on which Abbot is a recognized expert. Unfortunately for Abbot and his intended audience, however, he had recently committed the campus equivalent of harakiri by taking seriously the norms of academic freedom which MIT and other schools claim to cherish. This is indeed the case. This is a thing. We're supposed to be... For those of you who don't know, this week, October 18th to the 24th of 2021, is apparently Free Speech Week. You're supposed to be celebrating free speech. I have high amounts of doubts on whether or not universities take that seriously anymore with academic freedom and whatnot, that it's bothering me to no end, to be honest. Here, to be told that you can speak freely when that's not necessarily true some days. Abbot, in online discussions of the growing diversity, equity, inclusion, DEI, movement on American campuses, had stressed, quote, the importance of treating each person as an individual worthy of dignity and respect. In an academic context, he continues, that means giving everyone a fair and equal opportunity when they apply for positions, as well as allowing them to express their opinions openly, even if you disagree with them. All of that I agree with. Get a free and open chance. I get a free and open chance. You are worthy of dignity and respect by virtue of being human. What wrong thing do you have with that? And in a co-authored Newsweek op-ed in August, he had argued that DEI, as currently practiced on campus, quote, violates the ethical and legal principle of equal treatment and treats persons as merely a means to an end, giving primacy to a statistic over the individuality of the human being. This is one of the big problems that I have with DEI, to be honest. I'm in the same boat in that it gives primacy to how many do you have of a given demographic, more so than whether or not you're actually treating people as individuals. There's so much more to a person's identity. Abbot proposed instead an alternative framework that he called merit, fairness, and equality, whereby university applicants are treated as individuals, evaluated through a rigorous and unbiased process based on their merit and qualifications alone. His MFE norm rejected legacy and athletic admissions advantages, quote, which significantly favor white applicants. That's also a very true statement. For these heretical views, he was pilloried by a group of students who demanded that MIT withdraw his lecture invitation. 10 days later, the chairman of the sponsoring MIT department did just that. Here we have, quite literally, an instance of cancellation culture, one that seeks to impose a kind of annihilation or social death. Advocates for free speech, actions, or positions that their critics deem unacceptable increasingly use the term to describe those critics' efforts to suppress, marginalize, and otherwise punish their adversaries. In Abbott's case, denying him a prominent platform for his views on DEI, and perhaps other issues, was a classic cancellation effort. The Abbott incident also reveals cancellation's potential expansiveness. After all, his lecture topic, while socially and scientifically important, had nothing whatsoever to do with protesters' demand for DEI. This is a very key point here. This has been pointed out a couple of places, be it the Atlantic had a piece on this. There was a whole bunch of different pieces that I saw. And it's a good point. It's one thing to get thrown out because they find out that your work is crap, or that your views on something are completely, or views on something related to the talk are off. Things along that line, I still think it's not necessarily a good thing to just throw them out wholesale, but, let other people actually chime in and debunk those things. This is what these open lectures are meant for. But they canceled him for something completely unrelated to his actual work. They canceled him for something unrelated to his actual work, his views on DEI and his views on the admissions process. That's really scary, to be canceling people for things that are irrelevant to what you actually work on. Canceling them from their careers for things irrelevant to what they're actually working on. This is pretty damn crazy, actually. Even so, their cancellation scheme almost succeeded. In a lucky break for Abbott, he ended up delivering... Quillette is based in Australia, so they're a day ahead. He actually, as of this recording, he actually hasn't delivered that lecture because it's still the night of the 20th in the U.S. So, just a note on that. There's a little bit of a time zone difference here that's playing into some of the language. He ended up delivering the canceled lecture. He will deliver the canceled lecture, not at MIT, but at Princeton. There, some faculty led by conservative political theorist Robert George immediately stepped up and offered to sponsor it. Indeed, Abbott's luck was even more dramatic. The New York Times and other leading media gave the incident some prominence. Thousands of students signed up for Abbott's Princeton lecture, and his cancellation by MIT earned him a distinction bestowed by the American Council of Trustees and Alumni, which named him a hero of intellectual freedom. Bravo! Congratulations, Dr. Abbott. Not how you were expecting to get this, I'm sure, but it's the right thing. And as last I checked, there was well over 7,000, according to the last notice I saw on Twitter from Princeton and from Robert George and from the Madison Center there, who are hosting. There was well over 7,000 attendees to the meeting, and that's absolutely fantastic. I'm so thrilled at that, and you know what I've been wanting to see for so long. This is the kind of thing that gives me hope in this, is that, you know, somebody gets canceled in academia because of the views are not friendly, they don't fit the orthodoxy. Somebody else steps up, hosts, and a massive amount of people show up and say, F you, we want to hear from this guy even if we disagree with him on this other thing that's irrelevant. We still want to hear from him. That is awesome. That is a big F you in a lot of ways to this kind of crazy mob. The problem, unfortunately, is they tend to just, well, most of the time they tend to just move on to the next person after they've tried to destroy somebody's life the first time. So there is that. But I'm looking forward to that lecture on Thursday here, and I'm going to be finding that great, and I am thrilled about it, just both because it's going to be a fascinating topic, but it's also going to be just all sorts of good fun. This remarkable turnabout, a kind of moral jujitsu in which Abbot was able to convert his vulnerability to a mob's demands into a larger forum for his message, should gladden the hearts and minds of many people who deplore the forces of cancellation. It does for me. All too commonly, such pressures for conformity are strictly reinforced by hierarchy, fear of social isolation, and other informal sanctions, and the ubiquitous hostage-taking of reputation. What is it about the DEI movement, its tenets, its action agenda, its fierce, adamant champions, that has enabled it to gain such influence with students and some faculty on so many campuses? My close observation of the growing movement at Yale and elsewhere has convinced me of a number of related explanations. First, universities are massive entities whose leaders are obsessed by the need to raise ever larger endowments. Harvard's increased by $11.3 billion, or 40% last year. Washington University in St. Louis gained 65%. Holy crap! I didn't know I honestly didn't know that. I did not know that there were that big an increase in the endowment. You know what I'm going to say? That if for those folks who are funding those endowments, one way to get this stuff to stop real fast is to stop putting money into the endowments. Alumni could stop donating to this nonsense. You would see it end so fast because they rely so much on these endowments. Anyway, to fund ever more expansion, construction, academic, and non-academic programs and salaries. As such, they resolutely strive to create an impression of order on campus. But cancellations cause spasms of disruption, violence, and negative publicity that can affect their exceedingly important public rankings. Dissident students know that university leaders at the most prestigious schools, with the rare but notable exceptions like Robert Zimmer and Jeffrey Stone of the University of Chicago, are prepared to pay a dear price to secure campus peace. And since they and their faculty are overwhelmingly liberal politically, almost 90% identify with and often contribute to the Democratic Party, they tend to sympathize with the protesters' agendas, even when more radical than their own. This brings me to the second point about DEI. Oh, and yes, in a thing here, this is most definitely true from what I know. And I believe it's last number I saw with respect to the geosciences, which is, you know, Abbott's a geophysicist and I'm a climate scientist. We're both in that same thing. It's 27-1 liberal to conservative in my own field, or in geosciences, which is the overarching field. So yeah. This is a very, very unsurprising. This brings me to the second point about DEI. Its ideals are rhetorically appealing only so long as they remain undefined. Who, after all, can be against diversity and inclusion, at least in the abstract? The reality, however, is that as abstractions, these concepts are merely aspirational and essentially empty. What they actually mean in practice, and what cancellation cadres plainly mean by them, is strict regimes of affirmative action based on race, ethnicity, gender, and a few other attributes. These attributes, cancel culture insists, must be used in college admissions, job hiring, sports teams, instrumental ensembles, art projects, and all manner of groups, regardless of the actual distribution of preferences, talents, interests, and availabilities among the supposed beneficiaries. In a striking example, the Art Institute of Chicago just announced that it was dismissing all of its docents and starting over because too many of them are white women. I'm just thinking that might be technically illegal that they did that. I don't know for sure because I don't know if the Art Institute of Chicago gets any federal funds or how that would apply with the Civil Rights Act, but I think that's technically illegal to do that because I think it's Title VI and Title VII. Yeah, it's Title VI and Title VII that handle discrimination claims with respect to that have discrimination claims with respect to hiring, promotions, firing, and just workplace in general. And so I think that's technically illegal what they did, but that's a question for a lawyer to answer. That one I don't know for sure. But this thing that they're talking about, diversity and inclusion, what have you, what he's making here is a good point. They sound nice. They really do. But it's really rare to find a definition of diversity, for example, that actually accounts for other things aside from that whole list of attributes in here. And so it's like, it's hard to argue against them because who could be against them in the abstract? But what do they really mean is the thing. What do they really mean when they're defined and what are they in practice? This is the kind of thing that I worry about myself. It's just like, if you're defining it, yes. Do you mean that in practice? Do you follow through on that in practice? Or is it just a meaningless thing? Sorry, I had a popcorn kernel in one spot. Yep, popcorn kernel. So that's kind of what I worry about with a lot of these things. So it's concerning to say the very least. Cancel culture prescribes affirmative action as the means to install diversity in all activities that it values. But affirmative action means very different things to different people. It ranges from greater outreach to underrepresented groups, which Americans largely favor, to numerical quotas for minority groups, which most, including Black Americans, largely oppose. Yes. I don't realize this is actually something most people are opposed to, is the idea of having quotas for anything with respect to race, sex, gender, and what have you. Most people don't like it. The same distinction applies to inclusion and equity. Many of us endorse them in the abstract, but often disagree when faced with specific applications. Exactly. Cancel culture is different and actually yields less genuine diversity. For example, its orthodoxies often contradict minority communities' actual intense desires for greater police presence and enforcement in their neighborhoods. These same orthodoxies also impede more effective discipline of unruly and violent students, where such discipline might enable children to learn and pursue pathways to a brighter future. Cancel culture's zombie-like insistence that white racism today is still the main reason for continuing poverty, high violent crime rates, poor health conditions, domestic turmoil, and chronic family dissolution in troubled inner-city communities is a perverse distraction from and even a denial of the more important causes and possible remedies for these tragic, debilitating conditions. That's a topic for another time, but what it is one thing that I worry about is getting into like the single causism. Single causism. Everything's caused by a single cause, and in the world of, and in the strange world that we live in, apparently the single cause is, well, he wrote it there. The MIT fiasco should remind us how much cancel culture has to answer for. Even although this culture's activists are relatively few and its rhetoric is often risible in its hyperbole, its militants on college campuses sometimes have an outsized effect on others. Cruelly blighted reputations, perverse policy agenda, stigmatization of moderate Democrats, and much more. But Princeton's swift response to Abbott's cancellation by providing an alternative, Honored Forum, also suggests a hopeful, low-cost remedy consistent with free speech and liberal academic values. MIT should be ashamed of its craven support for bullying, and perhaps other more principled institutions will heed this simple, exemplary lesson. Yes, so I very much agree here also that MIT should be ashamed of the fact that it canceled the lecture. But I also agree with the sentiment here for the most part in this piece that it is really great. It was really great to see somebody step up and say, no, we're not going to let this man be canceled just because of his opinions on something that is unrelated to his work. We're not going to let that happen. I was really pleased to see that. I've been really pleased to see the number of people who jumped up and supported him. That's great. That's absolutely magnificent. We need more of that. We need more people to just simply stand up and say, no. This kind of stuff, and particularly in academia, this kind of stuff would just end in a heartbeat if people just stood up en masse and said no. Admittedly, I tried doing that myself. And, this would end in a heartbeat in academia and a lot of different places. It would stop if people just stood up and said, no, we're not going to put up with this. And, it's also not just what Princeton did that actually makes me really happy. You can see things like, I know Heterodox Academy had a little bit of something in support of Professor Abbott. There's an organization called the Academic Freedom Alliance who absolutely roasted, I'm not going to read this whole letter, but they roasted MIT for their dropping of the lecture from Dr. Abbott. MIT responded in a very short, I'll link all this for you in the description, I'm not going to read it now, but they responded in this kind of thing, and then the AFA responded with a second letter to say, you know what, that wasn't good enough. And I think, where was the line in here? Yes. The university's duty is clear. Once a university has extended an invitation to a speaker to speak to members of the campus community, the university must not rescind that invitation because some object that the speakers or ideas that the speaker has expressed are unacceptable. That is a basic principle, and it has to go back to the purpose of the university. The prime purpose of the university is not social justice. The prime purpose of the university is the pursuit of the truth. And you cannot do that if you silence people for disagreeing with you. You can't do that. So this is all the good importance here. And, I'm really glad to see people starting to chime up against this nonsense. And I hope maybe, I've seen another one with Kathleen Stock. People have come to her defense. In other words, she was, I think they went after her because she was holding a skull in a photo. I got to dig that up and read that whole story again. But things like that, and it's really encouraging now to see so many people starting to push back, in particularly in the academic side of things, where a lot of this nonsense with critical theory and what have you started. Admittedly, didn't start in the physical sciences, but where a lot of the critical theory related stuff started. Excuse me. So I think that's it for me. If you like the video, hey, hit the like button on the way out the door. Comment on the video, share the video, subscribe to the channel, all that good jazz. Don't forget, over on Locals. Come on over on Locals and join us for some good times. Until next time, I'm Adrian. I hope you stay curious.